wind howled softly through the bare branches of the maple trees lining Willow Lane, a quiet street in the Chicago suburbs where Elizabeth Dawson's single-story house stood like a sentinel of memory. The November air carried the sharp bite of early winter, and the sky, bruised with heavy clouds, seemed to mirror the weight in Elizabeth's chest. At 62, she moved with the steady grace of someone who had weathered life's storms, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose bun, her hazel eyes sharp but softened by years of unspoken hopes. Her home, a modest brick ranch with ivy creeping up its walls, was her sanctuary, a place where she had raised her son, Ethan, and where Max, her 12-year-old golden retriever, still greeted her each morning with a wagging tail. Elizabeth stood at the kitchen counter, her hands kneading dough for the apple pie she made every Sunday, a ritual that tethered her to the past. The scent of cinnamon filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of a jazz record spinning in the living room. Max lay curled on his rug by the stove, his graying muzzle twitching as he dreamed. She glanced at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "You're still my best company, old boy," she murmured, dusting flour from her hands. But even as she spoke, a familiar ache settled in her heart. Ethan hadn't called in weeks. Not since he'd asked for another loan, $5,000 this time, to cover some vague business expense. She'd wired the money, as always, telling herself he was just busy, that married life with Sophia was demanding. But the silence stung. She rinsed her hands and dried them on a faded dish towel, her gaze drifting to a framed photo on the counter. It showed a younger Elizabeth, laughing, with a toddler Ethan in her arms, his chubby hands clutching her necklace. Back then, she'd believed love could fix anything. When Ethan's father left, after a messy affair that shattered their marriage, Elizabeth had poured every ounce of herself into raising Ethan, the boy she'd taken in despite the truth he didn't yet know. She'd paid for his school, bailed him out of debts, and even funded his lavish wedding to Sophia 2 years ago. And yet, the older he grew, the further he drifted, his calls growing colder, his visits rarer. Still, she clung to hope, believing that one day he'd look at her with gratitude, not expectation. The phone rang, jarring her from her thoughts. She wiped her hands again and picked up the receiver, her voice warm with anticipation. "Hello, Mom, hey?" Ethan's voice was rushed, clipped, as if he were already halfway out the door. "Just checking in. Sophia's been feeling rough. Pregnancy's hitting her hard. Could you maybe send a little something? For supplements, for the baby." Elizabeth's heart lifted at the word baby. A grandchild, something new to love, to hold on to. "Of course, sweetheart," she said softly. "How much do you need? Maybe $3,000? I'll pay you back, promise." His tone was breezy, practiced, the same one he'd used since his college days when he'd racked up gambling debts. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the phone. "Ethan, I'm always here for you, but you haven't stopped by in months. Maybe come for dinner this weekend? Bring Sophia." "We could, Mom. I'm swamped." He cut in, irritation creeping into his voice. "Work's crazy, and Sophia's not up for it. Look, can you just send the money? I gotta run." Her throat tightened, but she forced a smile into her words. "Okay. Love you, Ethan." "Yeah, you too." The line clicked dead before she could say more. She stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, until Max nudged her leg with his damp nose. She knelt, scratching his ears, her voice barely a whisper. "At least you're still here, Max." But as she rose, a flicker of unease stirred in her gut. Ethan's excuses were nothing new, but something in his voice, a sharpness, a calculation, felt different. She shook it off, telling herself she was being paranoid. After all, he was her son, her only family. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She tossed in her bed, the creak of the house settling around her like an old friend. Max's soft snores from his bed in the corner were her only comfort. She stared at the ceiling, replaying Ethan's call, the way his words felt rehearsed. By 2 a.m., she gave up and shuffled to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed the living room, she noticed Ethan's old laptop on the coffee table. He'd left it during his last visit, months ago, claiming he'd pick it up soon. The screen was dark, but a faint glow from the power button caught her eye. She hesitated, then sat on the couch, her fingers brushing the trackpad. The screen flickered to life, revealing an email inbox. She wasn't one to snoop, but the subject line of the top email stopped her cold. Life insurance policy confirmation, Elizabeth Dawson. Her breath caught. With trembling fingers, she clicked it open. The email detailed the purchase of a premium-tier life insurance policy in her name, with Ethan and Sophia listed as beneficiaries. The payout, $2 million. Her heart pounded, a deafening roar in her ears. This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. She scrolled through more emails, each one a dagger. Messages to an insurance agent about expediting the process. A search history with terms like accidental death clauses and hiking trail risks Smoky Mountains. Her hands shook as she closed the laptop, the room spinning around her. Ethan, her boy, the child she'd raised through every sacrifice, was betting on her death. And Sophia, sweet, polished Sophia, was in on it. Elizabeth stumbled to the kitchen, gripping the counter to steady herself. Max followed, his eyes fixed on her, sensing her distress. She sank to the floor, pulling him close, her tears soaking his fur. "What did I do wrong, Max?" she whispered. "Where did I lose him?" The next morning, Elizabeth moved through her routine like a ghost. She fed Max, brewed coffee, and sat at the dining table, staring at the photo of her and Ethan. The betrayal gnawed at her, but so did a flicker of resolve. She wasn't naive. She'd always known Ethan was reckless, greedy even, but this was a line she hadn't imagined he'd cross. As she sipped her coffee, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Ethan and Sophia, all smiles, carrying a bag of vitamins. "Thought we'd drop by, Mom," Ethan said, his grin too wide. "Brought you some supplements. Gotta keep you healthy, right?" Sophia chimed in, her voice syrupy. "We've been so worried about you, Elizabeth. Ethan talks about you all the time." Elizabeth forced a smile, her heart pounding. "That's sweet of you both," she said, taking the bag. "Come in, let's catch up." As they settled in the living room, Ethan leaned back, casual as ever. "So, Mom, we were thinking, Sophia's pregnant and our apartment's too small. Maybe we could move in here, just for a bit, till we figure things out." Sophia nodded, her eyes gleaming. "It's so homey." If you're gripped by stories of betrayal and resilience, hit that subscribe button to follow Elizabeth's journey. Stay tuned to see how she faces the ultimate test of love and survival. Sophia sighed, placing a hand on her stomach. "It's tough, Elizabeth. The baby needs space, and our place just isn't cutting it." Elizabeth nodded slowly, her mind racing. They wanted her house, her home, worth over $1 million in this market. Ethan grew up here. He knew its value. And now, with the insurance policy, they wanted more than her home. They wanted her life. "Of course you can stay," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Your family." Ethan's eyes lit up, but there was something else there. Greed, not gratitude. "Great. And, maybe we could put the house in my name? To handle taxes, maintenance. Take the load off you." Sophia smiled, too perfect. "We're just looking out for you, Elizabeth. You deserve to relax." Elizabeth's lips curved, a mask of warmth. "Sure," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let me look into it." As they left, she stood at the door, watching their car disappear down Willow Lane. The wind picked up, rattling the leaves, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. She wasn't their mother anymore. She was their target. But what they didn't know was that Elizabeth Dawson was no one's prey. Not anymore. The Chicago suburbs woke to a gray dawn, the kind that draped Willow Lane in a heavy mist, muffling the world outside Elizabeth Dawson's brick ranch. Inside, the house felt hollow, its warmth drained by the absence of Max's familiar patter. Elizabeth stood at the back door, staring into the yard where dew clung to the grass like tears. Max should have been there, chasing squirrels or nosing at the flower beds. Instead, the silence screamed louder than any bark ever could. She clutched a faded leash in her hands, its worn leather a relic of 12 years of loyalty. Her hazel eyes, usually sharp, were rimmed red from a sleepless night, but beneath the grief burned a fire, quiet, steady, and dangerous. She turned back to the kitchen, where Ethan and Sophia sat at the dining table, picking at their breakfast with infuriating nonchalance. Ethan tore into a strip of bacon, his jaw working lazily, while Sophia dragged her fork across her plate, the screech of metal grating on Elizabeth's nerves. They hadn't mentioned Max since yesterday's bombshell. Ethan's casual admission that he'd dumped the dog somewhere, as if Max were trash. Elizabeth's voice trembled as she spoke, but she kept it measured. Ethan, Sophia, have you seen Max this morning? Maybe he's nearby. Ethan didn't look up, just waved a hand. Told you, Mom, I got rid of him. Old Mutt was always underfoot. House is better without him. Her nails dug into her palms, the pain grounding her. You have no idea what he meant to me, she said, her voice low, shaking. Max had been her shadow through every betrayal, Ethan's gambling debts, his father's abandonment, the years of pouring herself into a son who gave nothing back. Max had stayed when Ethan stopped coming home. Ethan shrugged, chewing. Come on, Mom, you're 62. What are you doing with a dog? Wasted 12 years on that thing. I did you a favor. Sophia set down her fork, her smile cold. Honestly, Elizabeth, you should thank Ethan. He made the tough call for you. Elizabeth's vision blurred, not with tears but with a rage she hadn't known she could feel. She turned away, her hands trembling as she gripped the counter. The photo on the coffee table caught her eye. Her and Max, a year-old pup in her arms, her smile radiant. That dog had been her heart when Ethan's grew cold. And now they'd taken him, just as they planned to take her life. She straightened, her voice steady. I'll make coffee. As she filled the pot, her mind churned. Ethan and Sophia's plan, the life insurance policy, the Smoky Mountains accident, was no longer a suspicion but a certainty. She'd seen the emails, the searches, the greed in their eyes. But losing Max? That was the blade that cut deepest, severing the last thread of hope she'd held for Ethan. She wasn't just fighting for her home now. She was fighting for herself. That afternoon, Elizabeth sat in her bedroom, the door locked, a notebook open on her lap. She'd spent the morning searching Ethan's laptop again, finding more emails about the insurance policy and a cryptic message to someone named Ricky about keeping tabs on her. Her heart raced. Ethan wasn't just plotting her death. He'd hired someone to make sure it happened. She closed the notebook, her mind sharp despite the grief. If Ethan thought she was a frail old woman, he was about to learn how wrong he was. She slipped out to the garage, where her old mountaineering gear lay dusty but intact. Elizabeth had been part of a local hiking club for years, her body stronger than most half her age, trained in wilderness first aid. She checked her satellite phone, a relic from her climbing days, and dialed a number she hadn't used in months. Her friend Carla, a retired private investigator. Carla, I need a favor, she said, her voice low. Can you trace a name? Ricky, no last name, likely local. Might be tied to Ethan. Carla's voice was gruff but warm. You okay, Liz? Sounds serious. I'll explain later. Just hurry. By evening, Carla called back. Got a hit. Ricky Malone, small-time thug, does odd jobs for cash. Last known address is a dive bar in Cicero. Be careful, Liz. Elizabeth thanked her and hung up, her pulse steady. She wasn't just careful, she was calculating. That night, she waited until Ethan and Sophia were asleep, then used Ethan's phone, left carelessly on the counter, to send a text to Ricky's number, pulled from the laptop. Change of plans. Meet at the diner on Route 83, midnight. Bring proof. She signed it with Ethan's initials, her hands steady as she deleted the message from the sent folder. At 11:30 p.m., Elizabeth drove to the diner, a neon-lit relic on the edge of town. She wore a dark scarf and kept her head low, sliding into a booth with a clear view of the door. Ricky arrived at midnight, a wiry man in a leather jacket, his eyes darting. He scanned the room, confused, then checked his phone. Elizabeth dialed his number from a burner phone, her voice disguised with a rasp. Ricky, you alone? Yeah. Who's this? He snapped, his voice rough. Ethan's out of town. I'm handling things. What's the plan for the old lady? Ricky hesitated, then lowered his voice. Ethan paid me $5,000 to tail her. Make sure she's at the Smoky Trailhead next week. Said it's gotta look like an accident. Cliff fall, no traces. He's got the insurance locked in. Elizabeth's blood ran cold, but she kept her tone even. And you're sure it's clean? Clean as it gets. I don't ask questions for that kind of money. She hung up, her recorder blinking red in her pocket. The next morning, she mailed the audio to the Chicago PD's tip line, anonymous but detailed, with a note about Ethan's insurance scheme. She didn't need to ruin him yet, just rattle him enough to make him slip. Back home, Ethan was pacing, his phone glued to his ear. Ricky, what the hell? You went to a diner? I never sent that. His voice cracked, panic seeping through. Sophia watched from the couch, her face pale. Ethan, what's going on? Elizabeth sipped her tea, her expression serene. Everything okay? Sweetheart? Ethan spun, his eyes wild. Just work stuff. Don't worry about it. But she saw the sweat on his brow, the way his hands shook. The police wouldn't arrest him yet, her evidence was thin without more, but the pressure was on. She'd cracked his confidence, and that was enough for now. Want to see how Elizabeth turns the tables? Subscribe now to witness her fight for justice. Don't miss a moment of this gripping tale of betrayal and redemption. Over the next few days, Elizabeth played her part flawlessly. She cooked for Ethan and Sophia, her meals deceptively rich, creamy casseroles, buttery mashed potatoes, sodium-heavy sauces. They ate greedily, unaware of the slow toll on their bodies. She watched their energy wane, their tempers flare, and smiled inwardly. But she wasn't done. She needed more evidence, something undeniable. One night, while they slept, she searched their room. In Sophia's purse, she found a vial of sedatives, unlabeled but potent. Her stomach churned. This was their weapon for the Smoky Mountains, meant for her. She pocketed a small amount, careful not to disturb the rest, and replaced it with sugar syrup. If they wanted to play dirty, she'd play smarter. By the weekend, Ethan announced the hiking trip. Thought we'd get some fresh air, Mom, he said, his grin forced. Smoky Mountains. Good for all of us, right? Sophia nodded, her hand on her fake pregnant belly. I've been so stressed, Elizabeth. I'm sorry if I've been harsh. Let's make this a fresh start. Elizabeth smiled, her heart cold. Sounds perfect. I'll pack light. As she folded her hiking gear, she felt a strange calm. Max was gone, but his memory fueled her. She wasn't just surviving. She was rewriting the story. Ethan and Sophia thought they were hunters, but they'd underestimated their prey. The Smoky Mountains would be their reckoning, not hers. She slipped the vial of sedatives into her bag, her lips curving. Let them come. She was ready. The road to the Smoky Mountains wound through Tennessee's rolling hills, the asphalt shimmering under a sky heavy with the threat of rain. Elizabeth Dawson sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's SUV, her hands folded calmly in her lap, her hazel eyes fixed on the horizon. The air inside the car was thick with forced cheer. Ethan's overly loud chatter, Sophia's syrupy smiles, but Elizabeth felt none of it. Her heart beat steady, a metronome of resolve. Tucked in her backpack were the sedatives she'd lifted from Sophia's purse, her secret weapon for the trap she'd set. Outside, the landscape grew wilder, the trees closing in like silent sentinels. The Smokies loomed ahead, their peaks shrouded in a mist that promised danger. Ethan pulled into a gravel lot at the trailhead, the SUV's tires crunching against stone. Here we are, he said, his grin too wide, his eyes flickering with something darker. Sophia looped her arm through Elizabeth's, her touch clammy despite the cool air. Come on, Elizabeth, don't lag behind, she chirped, her voice grating like a poorly tuned radio. This'll be fun. Elizabeth nodded, her smile a perfect mask. Can't wait, she said, her tone warm but her mind cold. She knew why they'd chosen this place. The Smoky Mountains were infamous, treacherous cliffs, unmarked trails, and a history of hikers vanishing without a trace. Every year, the local news ran stories of accidents. A slip on a wet rock, a fall from a ledge. Ethan and Sophia thought they'd write her story the same way. But Elizabeth had other plans. The trail climbed steeply, the path narrowing as it twisted through dense forest. The air grew heavy, the mist thickening into a fog that clung to the ground, obscuring roots and rocks. Wind howled through the pines, carrying the distant growl of thunder. Elizabeth's boots gripped the slick earth, her years in the Chicago Mountaineering Club giving her an edge Ethan couldn't imagine. He trudged ahead, his breath labored, while Sophia lagged, her designer hiking gear more fashion than function. The higher they climbed, the more the mountains seemed to turn against them. A gust tore through the trees, rattling branches, and somewhere in the distance, a low, guttural sound. A bear, maybe, or a wolf, sent a shiver down Sophia's spine. "Ethan, this is getting creepy," Sophia whined, clutching his arm. "Maybe we should turn back." "Relax," he snapped, his patience fraying. "We're almost at the overlook. It's fine." Elizabeth said nothing, her eyes scanning the trail. The overlook was their stage, a jagged outcrop hanging over a 200-foot drop, the perfect spot for an accident. She felt the weight of the sedatives in her pack, her plan crystallizing. She'd play their game, but she'd rewrite the ending. By late afternoon, they reached the overlook, a slab of rock jutting into the void, framed by a crimson sky. The fog had lifted slightly, but the wind was relentless, whipping Elizabeth's hair across her face. Below, the valley stretched into shadow, a sea of green swallowed by dusk. The temperature plummeted, the air biting through her jacket. Ethan gestured to a boulder.
"Mom, sit."
"Catch your breath." He pulled a bottle from his pack, its label bright with promises of electrolytes. "Here, drink this. Keeps you hydrated." Elizabeth took it, her fingers brushing his. She raised the bottle to her lips, tilting it just enough to wet her mouth, but not a drop passed her throat. She'd seen the vial in Sophia's purse, knew what they'd laced it with. "Thanks, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft. She reached into her pack, pulling out 2 energy bars wrapped in foil. "You two should eat." Long climb. Ethan and Sophia tore into the bars without hesitation, their hunger blinding them to the faint tear marks she'd concealed on the wrappers. Elizabeth sat back, her body relaxed, her mind a steel trap. She counted silently, her pulse steady. 1 minute. 2. The sedatives she'd swapped into the bars, taken from their own stash, would hit soon. She caught the glance they exchanged, smug, certain their plan was unfolding. Sophia's laugh broke the silence, sharp and triumphant. "She actually drank it. Too easy." Ethan's voice was ice. "Sorry, Mom, but that insurance money's mine." They stepped toward her, their hands reaching to drag her toward the edge. Elizabeth let her body go limp, slumping to the ground, her eyes half closed. She felt their grip, rough and impatient, as they pulled her across the rock. The cliff loomed, a yawning mouth ready to swallow her. She counted again. 3, 4, then a thud. Another. Ethan's hands loosened, and Sophia's gasp cut off mid-breath. Elizabeth opened her eyes, brushing dirt from her jacket as she stood. Ethan and Sophia lay sprawled on the ground, their faces slack, the sedatives working faster than she'd hoped. The wind roared, and a distant howl echoed through the trees, closer now. The temperature was dropping fast, and night was falling. The Smokies didn't forgive mistakes. If a bear or wolf found them before they woke, or if the cold claimed them, that was their lesson to learn. Elizabeth slung her pack over her shoulder, her lips curving. "Sleep well," she whispered, turning toward the trail. She'd descended only a quarter-mile when a faint cry stopped her. "Help, please." The voice was weak, broken, coming from a thicket off the path. Elizabeth hesitated, her instincts warring. She was done saving people who didn't deserve it. But the plea came again, desperate. She pushed through the brush, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. There, slumped against a tree, was a man. His leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his face pale with pain. He was about her age, his dark hair streaked with gray, his eyes sharp despite the agony. "Don't move," Elizabeth said, kneeling beside him. She checked his pulse, her wilderness training kicking in. I'm calling for help. She dialed 911 on her satellite phone, her voice calm as she gave their coordinates. Hiker Down, Broken Leg, Smoky Mountains, Klingman's Dome Trail. The operator promised an ambulance within the hour. Elizabeth stayed, wrapping her jacket around the man to keep him warm. His hand gripped hers, weak but grateful. "Thank you," he rasped.
I'm Henry.
Henry Sullivan. Her breath caught. Henry Sullivan. She'd heard the name before, whispered in Ethan's frantic work calls. A former investigator turned executive, tied to the Graham Group, the firm Ethan's company was begging for investment. Fate had a strange sense of humor. "Just rest, Henry," she said, her voice steady. "You're going to be fine." At the hospital, Elizabeth sat in the waiting room, her hands still trembling from the day's events. The doctor emerged, his face reassuring. "Mr. Sullivan's stable. He'll recover, thanks to you." Henry, now conscious, insisted on seeing her. She stepped into his room, where he lay propped on pillows, his eyes warm despite the bandages. "You saved my life," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Anything you need, Elizabeth, just ask." She smiled, patting his hand. "I was just there. No reward needed." But as she left, his business card in her pocket, she felt a spark of possibility. Henry wasn't just a stranger. He was a door to something new. Will Elizabeth triumph over her past? Subscribe to find out how her story unfolds. Don't miss the twists that await in this tale of courage and retribution. Back in Chicago, Elizabeth returned to a house that felt both hers and foreign. Ethan and Sophia were still in the Smokies, likely rescued by now, but she hadn't checked. She didn't care to. She was done being their savior. As she sorted through the mail, a plain envelope caught her eye. No return address, no stamp, just her name scrawled in sharp, angry ink. She tore it open, her heart sinking as she read the single page inside. "You took my son. You raised him, loved him, but he was never yours. I'm alive, Elizabeth, and I'm coming for what's mine. You'll pay for stealing Ethan." The signature was a single initial, M, Ethan's biological mother. The woman who'd vanished after her affair with Elizabeth's husband, leaving a newborn in her care. Elizabeth's hands shook, the letter slipping to the floor. She'd raised Ethan, given him everything only to face betrayal from him, and now this. A new enemy, lurking in the shadows. She sank into a chair, her mind racing. But she wasn't alone anymore. Henry's card lay on the table, a quiet promise. He wasn't just an executive, he was a former investigator, someone who knew how to find answers. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, Elizabeth felt ready. She'd survived Ethan's betrayal. She'd outsmarted his plans. And now, with a new threat rising, she'd face it on her terms. The Chicago suburbs greeted Elizabeth Dawson with a soft rain, the kind that painted Willow Lane in shades of silver and blurred the edges of her brick ranch house. She stood at the hospital entrance, her coat damp, her hazel eyes steady despite the storm inside her. The Smoky Mountains were behind her, a battlefield where she'd outwitted Ethan and Sophia, leaving them to the mercy of the wild. Now, she was back, ready to sever the last threads of a bond that had cost her too much. Her fingers brushed Henry Sullivan's business card in her pocket, a quiet anchor. She wasn't alone anymore. But first, she had to face her past. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows on the linoleum floor. Elizabeth pushed open the door to Ethan and Sophia's room, her steps deliberate. They lay in twin beds, pale and haggard, their faces drawn from exposure and sedatives. Ethan's eyes flickered open, his voice weak. "Mom, where'd you go?" "We woke up, lost." Sophia stirred, her breath ragged. "We passed out. It doesn't make sense." "Did you?" Elizabeth raised a hand, her voice cutting through like a blade. "Don't. I know what you did. The insurance policy, the sedatives, the cliff." She pulled a bandage from her ankle, revealing unblemished skin. "Mild sprain," they said. "Funny thing, I never drank your little concoction. But those energy bars? You ate those without a second thought." Ethan's face drained of color, his mouth working soundlessly. Sophia's eyes widened, her hands clutching the bedsheet. "You?" You poisoned us? Elizabeth's laugh was cold, mirthless. Poison? No, I just returned what was yours. You planned to kill me for $2 million. I loved you, Ethan. I gave you everything. And you gave me this. Ethan's voice cracked, desperate. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. You're sorry. Elizabeth stepped closer, her eyes burning. You threw Max away like garbage. You sold my life for a payout. And you, Sophia, played the doting daughter-in-law while sharpening the knife. She pulled an envelope from her coat, tossing it onto Ethan's bed. Open it. His hands trembled as he tore it open, pulling out a single sheet. His eyes scanned the text, his breath hitching. A paternity test? What is this? Elizabeth's voice was steady, each word a hammer. You're not my son. Your mother was the woman who wrecked my marriage. She left you behind, and I raised you. I gave you a home, a name, an education. I paid your debts, funded your wedding, built your life. And you? You gave me nothing but greed. Ethan sank back, the paper slipping from his hands. No, you're lying. You have to be. Sophia's voice was shrill. This is insane. You can't do this to us. Elizabeth's gaze shifted to her, unyielding. I already have. The house? Still mine. That transfer you signed? A fake. And Ethan's job? Gone. She let the words hang, watching their faces crumble. Henry Sullivan hadn't needed to lift a finger. His name alone, whispered to the right people at the Graham Group, had ensured Ethan's company cut him loose. A single call from Elizabeth, a favor unasked, had sealed it. Ethan's sobs broke the silence, raw and broken. Mom, please.
I'm sorry.
You should be, Elizabeth said softly, for being a thankless parasite. She turned, the door clicking shut behind her. Outside, nurses rushed past, the heart monitor's sharp beeps fading as she walked away. She didn't look back. Back at home, Elizabeth moved through the house like a woman reclaiming her soul. She packed Ethan and Sophia's belongings, clothes, trinkets, every trace of their presence, and called a moving company. By noon, their things were gone, donated to a local shelter. She changed the locks, the click of the new deadbolt a final note of freedom. But as she swept the kitchen, a chill crept up her spine. A plain envelope lay on the counter, identical to the one from before, her name scrawled in that same angry ink. She hadn't noticed it earlier. Her hands steadied as she opened it, but the contents stopped her heart. A single Polaroid photo, yellowed with age, showed a woman in her 30s, her dark eyes piercing, her smile cruel. On the back, in sharp script, "You can't erase me, Elizabeth. Ethan's mine. Always was." Tucked with the photo was a dog tag, Max's, its edges worn but unmistakable. Elizabeth's breath caught, her fingers trembling. Someone had been here. M wasn't just a ghost. She was close. That night, the phone rang, the caller ID blank. Elizabeth answered, her voice firm. "Who is this?" A woman's laugh, low and venomous, crackled through the line. "You know who. You thought you could take my boy, raise him, make him yours? He's my blood, Elizabeth. And you'll pay for keeping him from me." Elizabeth's grip tightened. "You left him. I gave him a life. If you want to fight, I'm ready." The line went dead, but the threat lingered, a shadow in the quiet house. Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table, Max's tag in her hand, her mind racing. She wasn't afraid, not anymore. She'd faced Ethan's betrayal and won. This new enemy, this M, would learn the same lesson. She slipped Henry's card from her pocket, dialing his number. "Henry, it's Elizabeth. I need your help." His voice was warm, steady. "Name it. Someone's after me. An old ghost. Can you dig into a name? Starts with M, tied to Ethan's past." "Consider it done," he said, no questions asked. "And Elizabeth? You're not alone in this." The next morning, Elizabeth stood in her backyard. The rain gone, the sun breaking through. She knelt in the dirt, planting rosemary and lavender, her hands steady in the earth. The garden was small but hers, a symbol of a life no longer tethered to others' greed. Henry arrived by noon, carrying a bag of groceries and a quiet smile. They cooked together, Simple pasta, fresh herbs, a bottle of wine. Laughing over small things, the weight of the past easing with each shared moment. "You're different," Henry said, his eyes soft as they sat at the table. "Stronger, like you've found your ground." Elizabeth smiled, her fingers brushing his. "I have. For the first time, I'm living for me." He nodded, his hand covering hers. "Good. You deserve it." That evening, they sat on the porch, the Chicago sky streaked with pink and gold. Elizabeth leaned back, the warmth of Henry's presence a balm to old wounds. She didn't know what M was planning, but she wasn't the same woman who'd begged for Ethan's love. She was a survivor, a fighter, and with Henry, a former investigator who knew how to unearth secrets. She was ready for whatever came next. The house, once a prison of obligation, was now her haven. The herbs in the yard, the meals she cooked, the quiet evenings with Henry. They were hers, built from the ashes of a life she'd reclaimed. But as she locked the door that night, she found another sign. A single rose, its petals black, lay on the doorstep, a note pinned beneath it. Soon, Elizabeth's jaw tightened. She crushed the note in her fist, her eyes scanning the dark street. "Come for me, M," she whispered. "I'll be waiting." The Chicago suburbs lay quiet under a late November moon, the air crisp and sharp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke. Elizabeth Dawson stood in her kitchen, her hands steady as she polished a small brass plaque engraved with a single word, Max. The house on Willow Lane was hers again, stripped of Ethan and Sophia's presence, its walls no longer echoing with betrayal. But the shadow of M, the woman who claimed Ethan as her own, loomed larger each day. The black rose, Max's dog tag, the venomous phone call. They weren't just. Elizabeth straightened, her resolve hardening. She wasn't running. Not this time. Henry Sullivan arrived at dusk, his dark eyes scanning the street as he stepped inside. His past as an investigator made him cautious, and his quiet strength anchored Elizabeth. "Found something," he said, spreading papers on the table. "Miranda Kane, Ethan's biological mother. She's been off the grid for years, but I tracked her to a motel in Cicero. She's volatile, Elizabeth, obsessed with Ethan, blames you for stealing him." Elizabeth's jaw tightened, her fingers brushing Max's tag. "She left him, Henry. I gave him a life, and now she wants to punish me for it." Henry's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "She's dangerous, but we're ready. I've got a contact at the Chicago PD. If she shows up, we'll have backup." Elizabeth nodded, her mind racing. She'd faced Ethan's betrayal, survived the Smoky Mountains, and reclaimed her home. Miranda was just another storm, and Elizabeth was no stranger to weathering them. She spent the evening with Henry, rigging a security camera at the front door and hiding a recorder in the living room. If Miranda wanted a fight, she'd get one, but on Elizabeth's terms. The next night, the air grew heavy, a storm brewing over Willow Lane. Elizabeth sat on the porch, Max's plaque in her hands, her heart heavy with memories. She'd planted a small garden in the backyard. Rosemary, lavender, and a stone etched with Max's name. A quiet tribute to the companion who'd never betrayed her. "I miss you, old boy," she whispered, her eyes stinging. Max had been her light when Ethan turned dark, and though he was gone, his love lingered, fueling her strength. A car slowed on the street, its headlights dimming. Elizabeth's pulse quickened, her hand slipping to the phone in her pocket. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped onto the porch, her silhouette sharp against the streetlight. Miranda Kane was older now, her dark hair streaked with gray, but her eyes burned with the same cruelty Elizabeth remembered from the Polaroid. She wore a faded jacket, her hands clenched, a knife glinting in one fist. "You thought you could take him," Miranda hissed, her voice low, venomous. "Ethan was mine, my blood. You turned him against me." Elizabeth stood, her voice calm, unbreakable. "I raised him, Miranda. Loved him. You ran. And now you're here, threatening me? You're too late." Miranda's laugh was jagged, unhinged. "Too late? He's coming back to me. I've been watching, waiting. I told him the truth, your lies, your fake love. He'll choose me." Elizabeth's heart twisted, but she held firm. Ethan chose himself. He betrayed me just like you abandoned him. You're not his mother. You're a ghost. Miranda lunged, the knife flashing, but Elizabeth was ready. She sidestepped, years of mountaineering honing her reflexes, and grabbed Miranda's wrist, twisting until the knife clattered to the porch. Henry emerged from the shadows, his voice sharp. Enough, Miranda. The police are on their way. Miranda thrashed, her eyes wild, but Henry held her firm, his investigators calm, unshaken. Elizabeth stepped back, her breath steady, the recorder in her pocket capturing every word. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Miranda's screams faded as the police arrived, cuffing her and leading her to a patrol car. She spat curses, her gaze locked on Elizabeth, but the fight was over. Miranda's obsession had consumed her, and now it was her prison. Elizabeth stood on the porch, the rain beginning to fall, washing away the last traces of the night. Henry wrapped an arm around her, his warmth grounding her. You okay? He asked, his voice soft. She nodded, her eyes on the garden, Max's stone glinting in the moonlight. I'm free, Henry. For the first time, I'm free. The next morning, Elizabeth drove to the shelter where she'd donated Ethan and Sophia's belongings. She'd heard they'd returned from the Smokies, broken and indebted, their lives unraveling. Ethan had called once, begging for money, but she'd hung up, his voice no longer her chain. She'd given him everything, love, a home, a chance, and he'd thrown it away. Now she was done. She left a small donation at the shelter, a check in Max's name, and walked away, her heart light. Back home, Elizabeth cooked dinner with Henry, the kitchen filled with the scent of herbs from her garden. They laughed over wine, their hands brushing, their connection deepening with each shared moment. Henry didn't promise forever, and neither did she. They were two souls who'd found each other after the storm, building something real, not a fairy tale. As they sat on the porch, the Chicago sky ablaze with stars, Henry took her hand. You've changed, Elizabeth. You're not carrying the world anymore. She smiled, her fingers tracing Max's plaque, now a keepsake on the table. I'm carrying me, Henry. That's enough. He nodded, his eyes warm. More than enough. Elizabeth leaned against him, the night wrapping around them like a promise. She didn't know if Miranda would fade or if Ethan would ever wake up to his mistakes. But those weren't her burdens anymore. She'd loved deeply, lost deeply, and found herself in the ruins. The house, the garden, the quiet evenings with Henry. They were her story now, written in her own hand. And as the stars burned above, Elizabeth Dawson closed her eyes. At peace, her heart finally home.